High Admiral Tilgrix Traxiv was having a bad day. He was currently sitting in a fighter, which he was only in because the escape pods were destroyed, and not only had it been EMP'd, disabling almost every system except life support, which itself was hanging by a thread, the gravgen was spinning. It spun at just the right speed to make him incredibly nauseous. And to make matters worse, none of this should have happened. He was 3 systems away from the main battlefront against the Meikai, and worse, he was on his way home from battle. His crew was being transferred home for a much-needed break from the stress of war, and they were woefully unprepared to be attacked so suddenly. The Meikai ships were there, picking at the corpse that was his ship. They were built in typical Meikai fashion, with no rhyme or reason whatsoever. Their design philosophy seemed to be, "Oh hey, we need this thing, Bob put it next to the thing Jigweight. We need this thingy as well. Okay, just slap it on top. It'll be fine." Annoyingly, this haphazard approach to ship construction was remarkably effective. It also meant they could just directly rip off whatever they wanted from enemy ships and slap it on a place that is functional. Only the humans are comparable with their modular design philosophy, but they aren't involved in the war, unfortunately. Or perhaps fortunately. The Sefliishan Sefli-ish-Iani and the Meikai governments had asked that the humans stay out of the war. Well, they asked everyone to stay out, but specifically the humans. The humans were too good at warfare. They demonstrate their prowess every galactic subcycle in the sim war games. Whichever side had them would win, even if it was the entire galaxy versus them. Humans never lose wars, except against themselves. In any case, the Sefliishan Empire and the Meikai Union preferred to battle it out themselves in accordance to the Galactic Constitution, subsection C, Rule 7 under Section X, disputed territory settlements. Legally, anyways. In practice, both parties simply wanted to see who was tougher. They decided to fight for the next 50 subcycles, capturing as much territory as possible, and whatever was held by each at the end would belong to them. While this ambush wasn't strictly against the galactic rules of warfare against Union members, it was certainly not fair play. This was all going through Tilgrix's mind as he drifted through space, watching the Meikai dismantle his ship and the Terran conglomerate hospital ships trickle in to start rescuing survivors. Suddenly, a bright flash appeared and a wormhole was ripped open behind the Meikai vessels, and through it, trillions of tiny ships entered and began ripping the unsuspecting vessels to shreds. The vtic, he thought in horror as the swarm of enemy ships tore through the Meikai like butter. The hospital ships began firing at the swarm, even as they tried to finish gathering the survivors and jump away. The vtic swarm began to race towards the Terran ships, being destroyed by the hundreds, but millions took the place of every ship destroyed. The vtic have been busy in their long exile, it seems, Tilgrix thought, as he began desperately praying to any being in the cosmos that could hear him that the EMP would wear off in time for him to activate the emergency jump drive every fighter was equipped with since the humans were first contacted. His prayers were answered. The ship's essential systems began turning back on, beginning with the jump drive. Internally broadcasting his gratitude to whatever force answered his prayer, he powered up the jump drive. This caught the attention of the vtic ships, but he managed to jump in time, vanishing into the ether just before they caught him. Tilgrix arrived at a nearby beam station a few seconds later, roughly 6 systems away. He breathed a sigh of relief before noticing a comms transmission request. Accepting it, he was startled by the sudden excited chatter noise of someone who was clearly far too new to the job of space traffic controller. "Hello, traveler. And welcome to the Syphilax primary beam station. Not only are we able to send you to any beam station in the galaxy in less than an hour, we have all that your heart could desire while waiting for a flight or for bureaucracy to let you leave. We have restaurants, bars, and casinos. We have gyms, pools, and parks. Here for all your between transit needs. Please dock your fighter in Dock C, Sub-Dock F." Tilgrix grinned. He remembered being that enthusiastic about his job. Within a few minutes, he was docked. Once he got out of the cockpit, he immediately headed over to the nearest map projector. "Cephalesian Military Office," he stated. A route was highlighted, and uploaded to his state-of-the-art HUD chip. He quickly made his way over. After a brief pause by the door, he entered. The computer scanned him and a hologram appeared behind the desk. Hello, High Admiral Tilgrix Traxiv. What brings you here? I bring dire news, he stated flatly. I need to speak to the Emperor immediately. Surprised, the digital sapient quickly smoothed her face before complying, opening a direct hololink between Tilgrix and the Emperor before vanishing. Tilgrix waited patiently for the computer to verify his identity and the Emperor to respond. This better be good, Admiral, the Emperor warned. I'm in the middle of a council session. We have urgent business to conduct. Your Majesty, this is the most important message I have ever sent in my life. The Emperor's face briefly darkened. This is the same as a human face paling, eye ridges shooting up, before he regained his composure. Go on, he said warily. As you know, I was being transferred out of battle and on my way home. 3 systems in from the front, we were ambushed by the Meikai. The Emperor raised an eyebrow at that. While that is certainly foul play, it is not illegal in and of itself, and certainly not dire enough by itself to warrant such a drastic opening statement. What else is there? Did they hurt civilians? Did they butcher anyone? What is it? Tilgrix hesitated before setting his shoulders. While the Meikai were harvesting my ship, a wormhole opened up, and trillions of ships arrived. Vtic ships. The Emperor froze, face becoming almost black. Are you sure? He asked, half rhetorically. Unfortunately so, Your Majesty. The Emperor smoothed his features, before setting his own shoulders and narrowing his eyes. Then we need to call an emergency session. I will have my servant send orders to assign you a ship. We meet before the Galactic Council in 3 days. The Emperor terminated the call. Within an hour, he was assigned a ship to travel to the Galactic Union Council Station for an emergency meeting. The war against the Meikai was put on hold. The Vtic had returned. Vtic Talix was ecstatic, practically bouncing in his seat. His master had invited him, his star apprentice, to participate in an actual diplomatic meeting. He knew logically that an emergency meeting called by the Cephalesians probably meant that either the Meikai had broken the rules, or they had, and were trying to shift the blame. But still, he was actually going to participate in a diplomatic discussion, rather than just observing it in a vid and discussing the meanings. Obviously, his master was going to take the lead, but he was allowed to make contributions. Ask questions! He startled when the shield flashed suddenly, indicating they had hit space debris. His master chuckled. If you startle so easily, perhaps you should have stayed home, he chided gently. Vtic paled. This is the same as a human blushing, embarrassed, and vowing to be more observant in the future. Attention passengers, docking proceeds in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and were docked. Thank you for choosing the Squill Proaz for your flight. The 2 passengers grunted as the docking clamps thunked against the ship before unbuckling and getting out. Don't forget to stretch your spines, Vtic, his master cautioned. You do not want them suddenly cramping in the middle of a diplomatic meeting. Vtic shuddered at the idea of his back, arm, and head spines cramping, causing them to extend and flex, and likely a diplomatic incident as well. Such an event has been the embarrassment of many a Dokrifian and Dokrifian delegate. He stretched his spines extra hard, making sure they were as loose as could be as they walked off the ship. Almost immediately, they ran into the Raxilon delegate, almost literally, coming around the corner of the dock just as they were walking past. I am so sorry, Vtic apologized. I never meant the Raxilonian held up a hand, cutting him off. No harm done. Besides, you are clearly my friend's apprentice at this, he turned to the elder Dokrifian. And how are you, Malagsar, my friend? I am doing quite well, thank you, Malagsar replied. This is my apprentice Vtic Talix. He pointed at Vtic, who by now was all but hiding his face in his neck feathers. Hello, Vtic. I am Grilchek Dlamuk III. How are you? Vtic cautiously raised his head. I am doing good. And you? He asked, a little sheepish. I am doing excellent. I had a marvelous flight. Their pool was cooled to the perfect temperature, Grilchek replied. Vtic was briefly confused, then remembered that Raxolonians loved cold water, to an odd degree. After some further conversation, the three resumed travel towards the council chambers. As they walked into the chambers, they saw a few delegates from various other council races, the Cephleetians, of course, as well as the Makai, the Terrans, the Kralvik, the Haltip, and the Foji-Eve. As he thought this, the Vechi delegate arrived, followed by the Zel and Yox. Furtzik shivered a little at seeing the Vechi delegate. Though they had not fought each other since they had each realized the sapience of the other, the Vechi had preyed upon the Dokrifians for a long time prior to that point, and genetic memory is often difficult to overcome. He hid it before the delegate could notice, and she passed by without incident. As the rest of the delegates trickled in, taking their seats in the large room, Furtzik was surprised to notice that the Cephleetians had a fourth member of their group, High Admiral Traive. He turned to his master and opened his mouth, but was cut off by his master. They called the meeting. As they are at war with the Makai, and so obviously need someone who can verify their claims. Who better than their top military mind? He asked his pupil, twisting his jaw. This is the same as a human raising their eyebrow. Furtzik nodded, sitting back in his seat as the last delegate, the Quillic, hurried in. The current council speaker, a middle-aged Terran human, stood up from his seat opposite the half-ring of delegates. The council is now in session. Cephleetian delegates, step forward, he stated. The three Cephleetian delegates walked to the middle of the chamber, leaving Admiral Traive behind. Please state why you have called this emergency session. The lead delegate cleared her throat before speaking. We have received a report most dire, Your Excellence. We have brought High Admiral Tilgrix Traive with us to give his report in person, she said. The speaker nodded once, and Admiral Traive quickly walked up. High Admiral Tilgrix Traive, please tell us the reason for this meeting. As you know, we were at war with the Makai, he began. When he was cut off. We're at war? The Kralvik delegate asked, eyebrow raised. Order, the speaker said. The delegate nodded, chastened as he sat back in his seat. Continue, the speaker prompted. Traive nodded and began again. We were at war with the Makai. When I was being transferred from the front, my ship was ambushed, 3 systems in. There was some grumbling about that, and some narrowed eyes darted towards the Makai delegates as the delegates in question shifted in their seats. The speaker looked at Admiral Traive. Go on, he said. Traive nodded once, then resumed. We lost badly, especially because our escape pod base had been damaged beyond repair. More muttering and angry looks at the Makai followed this statement. I only managed to escape because I was able to get in a fighter. However, my fighter got hit by an EMP, which knocked out all but my life support and gravgen, which was, unfortunately, spinning. Winces of sympathy or their equivalent followed from everyone in the room, including the Makai. Spinning gravgen, that's a nightmare. Furtzik shuddered before turning his attention back to the Admiral. As the Makai were taking apart my ship, a wormhole was ripped open behind them from my perspective, and from it spilled forth trillions of small vessels. Stunned looks from every delegate in the room, faces darkening the same as a human face paling, or their equivalent from those who knew what those numbers entailed. Furtzik racked his brain, desperately trying to think of where he had heard about such things. They tore through the Makai ships and did severe damage to the Terran hospital ships before the EMP wore off and I could escape. Several delegates gasped in shock at that, including Furtzik. The humans were supposed to be invincible. I mean, yeah, it was a hospital ship, but still. Who could have, Furtzik thought, face darkening in horror as he remembered just who had that power. Both I and my computer were able to positively identify these vessels as Volctic. 2/3 of the room jumped up from their seats in shock or had similar reactions, while the rest, all newer members, looked around in confusion and fear, wondering what could provoke such a reaction. Some protested, saying it couldn't be, they had been destroyed. Others saying no, they were banished and reduced to primitives. Order! Order! The speaker shouted over the din. The delegates quieted down. We humans can confirm that they were Voltic. We have the footage from our one surviving hospital ship of the 4. He put the footage up on the holo screen. The delegates gasped in shock as they saw what the Admiral had seen, although from another angle. They barely managed to jump before they overwhelmed the defenses. Fortunately, most of the wounded and the non-essential crew had been all moved to this ship, but still the speaker trailed off, looking sad. Anyway, I apologize, Thomas, for taking over your role briefly. Old habits die hard, speaker, the man replied, a small smile on his face. The speaker resumed. Now you have heard why we are here. The vtic have returned. Now we must decide how we will move forward. Council Delegate Tim Frost of the Halta Principality shuddered. The vtic? I thought they were myths. He looked around the room, hoping someone would be able to tell him who they were. Suddenly, one of the delegates from the most recent species to join the Union, the Yaks, stood up. Who, exactly, are the vtic? She asked, bewildered. Ah, yes. You weren't here when the Vtic War occurred, the Kralvik delegate said. He looked to the speaker. May I enlighten them? He asked. The speaker nodded. Well then, he said, turning back towards the Yaksian delegate. 5 great galactic cycles ago, the Vtic Collective entered the Galactic Union. They were a fairly young race. They had discovered FTL only a couple dozen subcycles prior and had colonized 2 systems in addition to their home system. They were an interesting species to the entire Union. They were a collection of individuals, but they had some kind of psychic network which they were constantly connected to. Severing them from this network via quantum barriers had no adverse effects beyond stunning them briefly, and all tested were able to reconnect immediately once the barrier was removed. They used this psychic network as a kind of internet. The most bizarre part, however, was that this evolved naturally. In fact, roughly 12% of all animal species on their homeworld had evolved that trait. Most of them were predators, but there are 3 documented herbivorous species with this trait and a few dozen, roughly 1. 6% of all creatures with this trait, including proto-Vtic, are omnivorous. Proto-Vtic in particular evolved to eat anything and everything, and this trait was only refined as they gradually evolved sapience. They had copious records, both in their psychic network and written down. They had their entire history, which they were all too happy to share with the Galactic Union once first contact was made. Everything was going well. Roughly 6 galactic cycles after the Vtic, the Terran conglomerate, then the United Human Federation, joined our ranks, and in less than a galactic subcycle, both the Cephalesian Empire, the Vechi Kingdom, and the Dokrifian Republic had joined as well. For another 3 dozen subcycles, everything went smoothly, as we entered a period of unparalleled numbers of first contacts. Over that period, we welcomed over 30 new members. During the last of those subcycles, however, as the numbers began to trickle to a stop, the Vtic began to become withdrawn. They all began returning to Vtic space and refused to answer any questions. Some individuals became angry, others mourned, still others rejoiced. The entire Union was understandably confused. Eventually, we sent spies. Rather, the humans did, as they were the best at such tasks. And what they found horrified them, and once we found out, the rest of the Union as well. There was a civil war on the Vtic homeworld, those who wished for things to remain, and those who wished for things to change. The insurgents wanted to convert the Vtic into a true hive mind, like the Zell. They believed that they were the ultimate race, and so deserved to control everything, and becoming a hive mind would make that possible. The insurgents had almost been destroyed when suddenly they won. The entire civil war, just a distraction. They had completed a device that allowed them to turn their entire species into a hive mind, and it had been activated. In a moment, the Vtic Collective had become the Vtic Oneness, and that oneness was commanded by the remnant of the leader of the insurgents, whose name is unknown, and even if it were known, would be blotted from history forever. This task now complete, the Vtic turned on the rest of the Union, though thanks to the humans, not without warning. They swooped in from warp, in hundreds of systems. In the initial attacks, they killed millions. Reinforcements arrived, and the war began. For the next 2 great cycles, the Union was racked by war. The war effort was, of course, led by the humans, but they were not the ones hit hardest. The Mei and the Kai had both been nearly wiped out. Thanks to luck, they were able to become the Mei-Kai Union we know today. The Uzuk were enslaved and freed 3 times. The Zel were psychically attacked, crippling them for half the war. But in the end, a human scientist developed a superweapon. This superweapon killed its creator, but it thankfully chose to assist the war effort, and with its help, we managed to beat the vtic. Galactic Union rules state that extermination is illegal, and so the superweapon had to be restrained to keep from breaking this law. It broke confinement to attack the vtic multiple times, despite our best scientists' efforts. In the end, we managed to imprison it thanks to collaboration from all Union members of the time. In a void prism space trifold time vortex cell, creating the prison known as Elixium. And now, it seems, the vtic have managed to figure out how to open wormholes without trifold vortex stabilizers.